So he's going to make a distinction between foundationalism itself and Cartesian
Yeah.
foundationalism as we go here. So he says, Papa now says pretty much the same thing. He says this argument, that is for first philosophy, depends on the assumption that knowledge needs to be certain in the sense that it should derive from methods that necessarily deliver truth. So if you hold that knowledge requires certainty, as Cartesian foundationalism holds, then you will hold that philosophy needs to come before science. And so notice they reject first philosophy because of this notion of Cartesian foundationalism, because Cartesian foundationalism says we have to have certainty. And of course, we can't have that. And therefore, if we can't have that, then we have to reject first philosophy. That's the basic idea. And he says, unfortunately for Churchland and Papineau and others who use this argument, is entirely, he believes, wrongheaded and more than 50 years out of date. And so he's going to help us to see this and get clear about Cartesian foundationalism. And he wants to take a look at some background issues in epistemology. So let's go ahead on and jump into epistemology, the nature of knowledge here, and see what he has to tell us.
Right. And again, let's point out the claim here. If you hold the knowledge requires certainty, then you'll hold that philosophy needs to come before science. And then, there's just a lot of baked in assumptions here. Like you must hold on to this. Okay, well, Mr. Scientist man, do an experiment that shows me that.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, we can't. Okay. Well, then it seems like you're not talking scientifically. You're talking, philosophically. All right. So foundationalism, we can accept some beliefs on the basis of accepting other beliefs. Right. I hear a rustling sound outside due to the movement of leaves on our tree. I realize that a wind is blowing. My belief that there is a wind blowing is based on and justified my belief that the leaves are rustling. The first belief, that there is a wind blowing, is indirect, that it is justified mediately, that is through or by the means of the second belief, that the leaves are rustling.
So notice what he's trying to do now is to help us to understand what foundationalism is all about. We accept certain beliefs on the basis of accepting other beliefs, right? That's the notion. And so what we're going to get to now is, what is this basis? What is this foundation? That's what he wants us to get to in foundationalism. He says, for the foundationalists, epistemic chains of justification stop with beliefs that are not justified on the basis of other beliefs. So this belief is based on this belief, and this belief is based on this belief, and so forth. But we stop somewhere, and where we stop, that's the foundation. And so he says, for the foundationalists, all beliefs are either basic or non-basic. Basic beliefs are not justified solely by their connection to other beliefs, but that does not mean that they're not justified by something. Most foundationalists, he tells us, will say that a properly basic belief is justified by an experience, right? Or by the way the belief was formed properly by relevant, that is, visual or something, faculty. And so the foundationalists, he suggests, have criteria for their basic beliefs. When do we stop? Well, the basic belief stops at, for instance, an experience, right? Some type of, a visual experience, auditory experience, something like that, right? Sensations, that kind of stuff. And so, for example, he says, my belief that the wind is blowing is justified by my belief that the leaves are rustling. And this later belief, the leaves are rustling, is justified by my belief that I hear, there's the experience, the leaves rustling. And so this final belief is properly basic. This sensational belief, sensation, is properly basic. It's not justified by other beliefs. It's justified by experience. Namely, I seem to hear the rustling of leaves. And so foundationalists try to get us to these foundational beliefs that we can hold to and build other beliefs on top of those beliefs, right? And experience is one of those that a foundationalist would suggest is a foundational belief, right, or a basic belief.
Right. All right. So what about Cartesian foundationalism?
Well, that's different, right?
Right. Exactly. Now we are in a position to state what Cartesian foundationalism is. A Cartesian foundationalist takes the fundamental items that justify everything else to be such that it is impossible that we be mistaken about them. So it has to be impossible to be mistaken about them. Good luck with that. These ultimate items, usually experience, have to be completely certain, or they cannot serve as appropriate foundations for everything else. And as a married person myself, who is actively listening to my wife seeing the words come out of her mouth, I sometimes don't always hear absolutely everything. And therefore, I know that my wife cannot speak because I'm not absolutely certain of what she just said. And I dare not ask her again to repeat herself.
And we hope she doesn't see this.
That's right. It's too far down. It's
Yeah.
Thus, for the Cartesian foundationalists, the foundational beliefs must meet extremely high rational standards, indeed too high. Cartesian foundationalism is most likely unattainable. Hold to the idea of Cartesian foundationalism Cartesianally. You can't. There we go.
Right. So since Cartesian foundationalism is unobtainable, and these Churchland and so forth, Papa now believe that you have to have that kind of, foundation, they reject first philosophy, right? Because they see this foundationalism as a basis of first philosophy, and they reject it because you can't have this certainty. And of course, they hold to scientism. He says, if you look at the statements of Papanow and Churchland earlier in the chapter as to why some philosophers accept first philosophy, they both think that it's because they are Cartesian foundationalists. The idea is that if the assumptions of science are not completely certain and totally immune from error, then science is without adequate justification, and a skeptic about the claims of science wins. And of course, they don't want that, and so they reject this foundationalist idea, right? He says, but notice, nothing could be further from the truth. Today, most epistemologists are foundationalists, but he does not know of a single one who is a Cartesian foundationalist, right? In other words, Cartesian foundationalism was given up, he tells us, more than 50 years ago. Today, most foundationalists believe that certain experiences can serve as solid foundations for proper basic beliefs, but those experiences, he tells us, need not be immune from error. So you don't have to have absolute certainty in order to accept foundationalism. That's what he's suggesting here.
Right. Papanow and Churchland are seriously mistaken in their rejection of first philosophy, but why do these scholars reject first philosophy? The answer turns out to be, well, pretty obvious. When we examine cases that are autonomous from science, outside the competency of science, such as the proper system of ethics, the nature of modal logic, and so forth, it becomes obvious that the basic issues in these areas of reflection have nothing to do with physics, chemistry, and so forth. The basic issues are not stated in scientific language, nor could debates about them be resolved by a scientific experiment. And here is that's the issue, right? It doesn't fall within the concept of what I want to talk about. Okay.
Yeah.
Guess what? You might have to be a more well-rounded person.
That's right. Change the subject, right? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
All right. So that's the basic idea and why first philosophy is important. It's autonomy, and that sort of thing. Why it was rejected because it's based on foundationalism that folks assumed had to have certainty, and of course there is no certainty there, and therefore you reject foundationalism, you reject basic first philosophy. And he says, no, that's not necessarily the case. And so in conclusion, then he says what he's done in this section is he's tried to clarify first philosophy by stating the autonomy and authority thesis with regard to first philosophy, right? It can stand on its own. And in some areas, it has authority over scientific claims. He says he's argued that the rejection of first philosophy is based on weak arguments, right, like assumptions that Papanow attempts to make, or a misunderstanding of why advocates of first philosophy hold to the view, like you have to have Cartesian foundationalism, right? No, you don't.